Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
For a third day in a row, climate change activists from Extinction Rebellion have been protesting in central London. Some protesters glued themselves to a carriage on the Docklands Light Railway, while others blocked central London roads. So far, some 300 have been arrested. Tom Simons reports.
This is normally one of the busiest bridges across the Thames. Extinction Rebellion, a new direct action protest group, hoped to take control of this and other key London locations for up to 2 weeks. Well, today the police moved in.
So we have an emergency here, and I don't think we're causing any harm.
Using powers designed to balance the right to protest with the need to reduce disruption.
The police are taking this extremely slowly, not least to keep the temperature under control, but also because they're starting to run out of police cells.
I'm here because humanity is facing extinction and ecocide. I'm here as a peaceful protester. The government must take action.
Their demands, the declaration of a climate emergency, radical cuts to carbon emissions. We're sorry for the disruption, they say.
The fact of the matter is that we've tried things that are less disruptive for over 30 years. People have been petitioning, marching, writing letters, and nothing's been done.
But they also brought a busy rail line to a halt, the Docklands Light Railway, using unusual tactics. Cue angry commuters, and this from London's mayor.
I am worried about protesters targeting public transport, because I'm trying to encourage more and more Londoners to use public transport because it's good for the environment.
Another target was Oxford Circus, used by 23 bus routes, as well as black cabs.
Well, it's all getting about, like, people can protest, but I think to have it for 2 weeks, I just think totally too long.
Scotland Yard appears intent on making sure that doesn't happen, but then everyone sitting here has said they're prepared to be arrested. They believe we should all be more worried about this issue, and they say their protests will continue.
Here in Oxford Circus, the arrests are continuing this evening. Teams of 5 officers going in at a group at a time and taking one person out each time, which is taking an awful long time, and they're being brought down to these police vans down here. It is going to take time, and the protesters say they are intent on staying here because that's how they will be noticed.
Tom, thank you very much.
Now, 4 environmental activists have glued themselves together and chained themselves to the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's house. It's unclear just how much disruption that has caused, but more than 300 people have now been arrested after 3 days of protest in London over climate change. Extinction Rebellion has blocked traffic at major sites across the city, and 3 activists today, also glued themselves to a train at Canary Wharf station. Ed Howker has this report.
Channel 4 News. What message are you trying to send today?
Excuse me. That's what I want. That's why I'm doing this. The government needs to take action.
Cathy Eastburn, one of 3 arrested this morning after gluing herself to a train. Day 3 of the Extinction Rebellion in London, and the disruptions spreading. From the roads to the rails, this pop-up protest closing a line at Canary Wharf.
For Extinction Rebellion, today we're calling for a pause. This is a minor disruption to our lives in comparison to the disruption across the world that's happening right now due to the ecological crisis.
The action behind me is the pointy end of the Extinction Rebellion protest today, the first of its kind, which is designed to disrupt the heart of the London transport network. But on the TfL website right now, there are more severe delays on the District line than here on the Docklands Light Railway. And I guess that's part of the strategy, to begin and test the water to see how seriously these protests are treated, and potentially to get more serious as the days go on.
The organisers are promising action could last for 2 weeks or longer, but 2 hours here and it was all over. The activists unstuck from the roof and introduced to the back of a van. Easy enough with just 3, but in central London, large-scale sit-ins continue, with more than 300 arrested so far. But this is a costly closure. The West End's retail lobby claiming the protests have cost business £12 million. The price is worth it, say protesters, who want the government to cut climate emissions to 0 in the next 6 years. Some people have accused you of targeting London commuters. Are you targeting the right people with this action?
So yes, because the only way we can get the message to the government is to hit their priority. Government priority above all else is the economy. So we have to hit the economy. We cause economic disruption to the level where we get the government to meet with us and meet our demands.
At Waterloo, London finally gets its Garden Bridge. Some arrests here today too, but more yoga and peaceful protest. Mid-afternoon, and the next actions closer to home. Jeremy Corbyn specifically, 4 Labour and Corbyn supporters glued and chained to his fence, among them Councillor Skeena Rathor.
I think we want to raise the alarm around the inaction of the Labour Party, and for us to plea with Jeremy that he steps into a leadership role.
And Jeremy's here, in fact. Mr Corbyn, what's your response to this climate protest?
I never give interviews or discussion outside my house in any way. Thank you very much.
But there are protesters right outside you, sir.
Thank you very much for coming.
Shouldn't you be speaking to them about exactly why it is they're outside your house, complaining about the way in which the Labour Party is treating the issue of climate change? Mr Corbyn? Extinction Rebellion says mainstream politics doesn't have the answers. They want a citizens' assembly on climate change, and they're not stopping.
Well, with me now is Farhana Yamin, a climate change lawyer who advised the Marshall Islands for the 2015 Paris Agreement, and yesterday was arrested after gluing herself to Shell headquarters in London. And that's not your only qualification. I mean, you've worked for the EU and been a member of the IPCC panel on climate change. Let's just have a look at what you did yesterday and talk us through what was going through your head as you went from respected lawyer to direct action protester, causing great controversy.
Well, I hope I'll still be a respected lawyer. Many respected lawyers in the past, you know, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela and others have broken the law at certain periods in history. It's become necessary to say that the political system is stuck and that something needs to happen. And breaking the law in my case is about peaceful mass civil disobedience, and that I was part of almost now 300 people who've been arrested. So this group, Extinction Rebellion, is calling on everyone to start engaging in non-violent, peaceful civil disobedience to make the point that we're, you know, stuck in this power vacuum where industry has essentially put the brakes and lobbied very hard for science not to be respected.
I mean, you have literally crossed the line, and figuratively though as well, haven't you? In that you're saying the system doesn't work. The system you've worked within to try and make the world a better place has failed.
It has. Look, I'm very proud of all the things that I did, and I think that those are really important legal rules that we've enshrined in the Paris Agreement, we've got in the Climate Change Act, we've got in the EU legislation, we've got 1,500 laws around the world that have been enacted in the last 30 years.
Which have driven you to that.
But none of them add up to planetary safety. None of them are in line with the well below 2 degrees and the 1.5 degree goal, which is also enshrined in Paris. So it's time now for governments especially to accept that they need to not just kick this down the line to the next election, to the next review, to the next big COP that's coming along where they can showcase a little bit more action, but to actually understand that this is an emergency.
And to all those people who've been inconvenienced by the protests, and there's been lots of anger about it, from people saying, what's the point of creating a traffic jam? It's just making climate change emissions, you know, carbon emissions worse. What would you say?
There is inconvenience, and I'm glad that
and greater carbon emissions.
I'm glad that you've called it inconvenience, and this is the kind of disruption that we need to tell people to weigh up this disruption against the disruption of the lives and livelihoods and deaths that are being caused. You know, in some of the small island countries that I represent, their entire economies have been wiped out, not just a 1 day and a 2-hour delay in their journeys.
But how do you think causing traffic jams and inconvenience pressures governments?
First of all,
it just annoys people, doesn't it? It doesn't do anything to the government. The government's all on holiday.
We have had so much support it's quite compelling. So it's not true that it annoys everyone. Many people are curious. So many people have said that they support this rebellion phase. Many people have chosen to join. I've been physically present on Waterloo Bridge, for example, where people have been curious and joined and understood that there is something that needs to happen, that something different needs to happen. So I think by highlighting the fact that, you know, we haven't come as far as we should have done in these 30 years and asking the politicians to own the emergency, we need to make that much clearer to everyone.
But do you think the action is targeted in the right way? I mean, what I'm saying is, you know, you're not really hitting the government here. You can, you know, there's now talk of hitting the London Underground, which is one of the most, you know, environmentally sound ways to get around the capital. I mean, what's the point of that?
I think the point is to create some disruption that's much louder than the business as usual political coverage that we've been getting, frankly. You know, in my time as a lawyer for 30 years in this process, I would say 20 years of that first period since 1989 was around the media discussing whether climate change was real or not and having lined up skeptics versus others. So we've lost about 20 years because of the way in which the media, for example, and the government chose to allow this debate to just percolate. And now we can't lose another decade. So we need to shift people's consciousness. We need to actually cause something different to happen and for people to accept in their hearts that they need to change their lives.
But one of your key demands is to be carbon neutral in Britain, or is it Britain or the world, by 2025? I mean, what impact would that have on people of modest means?
Well, people need to understand that there are huge benefits to shifting to a clean, zero-carbon economy, to reducing the use of natural resources.
But do you know what the cost would be?
We don't know what the cost would be, but you know, the costs are not everything. We need to preserve what we value best in society, which is to secure the well-being, to secure good jobs, to secure welfare. And the system currently isn't securing that. You know, Britain is a very divided nation. There's huge amounts of inequality. We are not all sharing in the prosperity that we've been promised under this, carbon-intensive lifestyles don't benefit everyone equally. So it's not like the system's delivering benefits across the whole anyway.
But it's often more expensive, isn't it?
It doesn't have to be, and that's one of the demands, that any actions that are taken, you know, prioritise those who are suffering the most, including in other countries, and put climate justice at the heart of climate policy.
Farhana Yamin, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
They've been going now for 3 days straight. Climate change activists Extinction Rebellion began their demonstration across London on Monday and have now spread to Scotland. Their tactics are non-violent and they're seeking to make the government take notice of climate change, reduce carbon emissions to zero by 2025 and create a citizens' assembly to oversee progress. Some even glued themselves to a train today, while others chained themselves to Jeremy Corbyn's house. But with nearly 350 arrests, thousands of commuters held up en route to work and millions of pounds of lost trade to those businesses blocked by the protests, is this really a fair and effective way to get change? Here's our UK correspondent, Elizabeth Glinker.
It looks like a festival and sounds like a festival. But this is direct action. Day 3 of the Extinction Rebellion.
We're blocking roads, it's going to cost the government money, they can't get milk to Tesco's.
We have to take global action, and it's only the government that can do that. They're not doing it, that's why we're here.
Protesters are occupying major landmarks across London and Edinburgh, sitting in, closing roads, gluing themselves to trains and causing disruption to thousands of businesses and commuters.
They've had a couple of days of disruption and they may well have, been late for work or late home for work. And someone tweeted me last night and said they were late for their daughter's birthday party. And of course, we all want to be at our daughter's birthday party on time. But what about his granddaughter's birthday party? What's happening today is about tomorrow, not just the inconvenience today.
Greenhouse gases are 43%
less than they were in the 1990s, so there has been some progress.
Yes, good. There has been a degree of progress. We've made the easy progress. You know what it's like when you start trying to change things? The easy things topple first. We're now into the difficult part of the game. We've got 12 years, and that's a tangible period of time. You and I can remember what we were doing 12 years ago. We hope to know what we're going to be doing in 12 years' time. I'd rather we were living on a healthy planet at that point, but I don't think that we are going to achieve that if we wait for our politicians to act. And this is the people acting.
10 years ago, the UK was a pioneer in environmental policy. It created the first climate change committee and set a series of targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But the Extinction Rebellion believes that momentum has been lost, something the Environment Secretary appeared to concede.
The point's been made. Let's make sure that we now move to a stage where we have a serious conversation about what we can do. Now, the UK, under governments of different parties, has played a role in reducing carbon emissions and, at the same time, growing the economy. So we have shown that you can do both. But I think, yes, there is more to be done, and we need to make sure that we have a serious conversation about the role that Britain can play.
If you look at the amount emitted per country, the country that's emitting the most is China, hugely. Secondly is the USA. But if we look at the amount emitted per person in the country, China, of course, has a large number of people. The top-ranking countries are the USA and then Australia and Canada. The UK is about 8th and actually emitting per capita the same as the Chinese.
Everybody here is committed to fighting climate change, but the group behind the protest has some specific goals, including a citizens' assembly and an aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2025. That's just 6 years. So if they are going to make that work, what has to happen?
One of their stated aims is zero carbon emissions in sort of the next 5 or 6 years, but that would mean massive changes for individuals, wouldn't it? Basically, no flights, no cars, a huge increase in renewable energy. Is that really possible? Can that really happen?
I think what you do, you aim for the stars to get to the sky, don't you? And you aim for the sky to climb to the top of the tree. I think we have to set far more ambitious targets to spur people into thinking about this.
3 days of largely peaceful protest has seen more than 300 arrests. These police were filmed moving into Parliament Square earlier tonight. The cost of the protest is already being estimated in the millions, a measure of success for a group which views disruption as its main weapon in the fight against climate change.
Joining me is Farhana Yamin from Extinction Rebellion and Lord Barker, who served as Minister of State for Climate Change in David Cameron's government. Welcome to both of you. If I could start with you, Farhana. I mean, today, you could understand perhaps why you might target roads, but actually there was disruption to public transport, which I would assume you want people to use.
Well, it was for a very short period of time, and it was a new method that the group was trying out, and I think the feedback on it, they're still assessing that. There was actually a huge spike in interest from people in the aims of Extinction Rebellion.
Isn't the feedback just going to be people complaining on social media, I can't get to work?
You'd be surprised that some people are genuinely very interested. I'm not saying everybody is interested. Obviously, people are annoyed and cross, and journeys are disrupted. But what's the point of the disruption? I guess everyone's asking. And you know, the point of the disruption is in some way to make you think about what are your personal priorities, and they're to make the nation think what are priorities. If you're so annoyed just about your 2-hour delay, you're very unlikely to be, you know, that caring about what happens to the planet in 10 years' time, in 5 years' time, in your children. So you need to recalibrate things.
Alienating some of those people, a lot of them. I mean, a 2-hour delay is not a small amount, and people do have to get to work to earn money. And just talking of money,
or pick up their kids, or go to hospital.
OK, well, I'm more than capable of making that argument for myself for just a moment, but I'll bring you in on the government side of it. I think in terms of, you know, getting businesses on board, you don't want to punish small businesses. You may understand why you go outside Shell, but there have been businesses that have lost millions because of this disruption.
We totally understand that there are businesses that are disrupted, that are individual journeys that are disrupted, but we're asking people to examine why this is happening, to examine why we're now suddenly finding that we're at, you know, a 10-year cliff edge in terms of the climate and ecological emergency. So the disruption is designed to wake people up, and I'm sorry that that disruption is causing people to be delayed for work. It's not that we don't value what they're doing. It's just that the system has kind of broken down and people need to be aware of where we are in terms of the emergency.
You say the system's broken down. If I bring you in at this point, Lord Barker, the government has taken its eye off the ball when it comes to climate change, hasn't it?
Well, I think the debate has moved away from climate change. So first of all, I think it's great that we're here on Newsnight talking about climate change and not banging on about Brexit.
Don't worry, that's coming next.
but it is really good, and I think focusing public opinion on this is absolutely right, because there is a climate emergency. But I think alienating people by gluing yourself to trains or driving people into cars rather than on the tube is the wrong way to go about it. And actually, we've done some fantastic things in this country.
If they weren't doing that, you wouldn't be on Newsnight right now. No, in all seriousness, one of the very first things Theresa May did as Prime Minister, do you know what that was?
Tell me.
Abolish the climate change department.
No, what she didn't abolish. That was my department, so I was very attached to it.
But you weren't in it when she was there.
What she did was take climate change and put it into the business department, so it now sits at the heart of the economy, rather than being the smallest department in Whitehall. Okay. Let's just see what has the government done since 1990. Britain has cut its carbon emissions by 44%. We took this challenge on to reduce our emissions by 2050 by 80%, and we're already halfway there. That didn't happen by chance. We're getting rid of coal. We've got a massive increase.
Sorry, you say we're getting rid of coal, but could I attach some facts to that?
Please.
Why do the European Union, in their figures, say that the UK is the European leader in subsidising fossil fuels?
Because that's not coal. We've almost eradicated coal completely. And coal will have gone by 2025.
But you could say one thing and not be doing something in a completely different area. You say it's an emergency,
yeah,
but we are the leader in subsidising fossil fuels.
Let's have a couple more statistics. We've cut carbon emissions by 44%. We've seen emissions from the energy sector fall by nearly 60%. We've seen emissions from transport fall significantly. We've seen...
What about homes?
For homes, more challenging.
More challenging, isn't it? Because that target was removed, and that ability to help homes actually insulate their homes, that was removed as well.
I agree. We need to... the built environment is somewhere we need to...
When you say more challenging, that's exactly what this particular group may feel like not going to their work today and the next day and the next day because it's not being treated as an emergency.
I agree with a lot of what they say. I think what I think though that we need to bring people together and form a consensus rather than risk alienating people with extreme action. But you're absolutely right. Getting us on the programme has had that benefit, but I think long term I'm actually just more optimistic that there are solutions out there and want to reward people for making the right choices rather than stop them getting to work.
OK, fine. They've got this extra 2 hours because they can't get to work, some of these people. You want them to focus on the next steps. Your action plan is a little bit thin on the ground.
I think one thing I can agree with Lord Barker is there's lots and lots of solutions, and actually we can decarbonise much faster. The costs of renewable energy, of green technologies has plummeted, so they are now more than cost effective. They outbeat coal and fossil fuels. And what's sad is that this government has kind of gone backwards. It's subsidising to a large extent the fossil fuel industries. It's subsidising shale gas. It's promoting fracking. Can I just finish?
Just finish that point.
It's promoting fracking. It's increasing our aviation emissions. And by and large, you know, that big drop in emissions that we had and the cut in coal station generation, you know, we outsourced most of our manufacturing to China. So if you include all of those factors together, if you look at international aviation and shipping, all of those things, our emissions are not that healthy. And we're not really playing the kind of leadership role that, you know, is suggested by this sort of absolute figure that's there.
Can you see that?
This subsidy of fossil fuels, do you know what the primary source of the subsidy is? It's going to help the poor, the most vulnerable, the elderly heat their home, the winter fuel payments, and the extra welfare benefits that allow people to keep their health. Now, in the long term, we want people to live in homes that are easier to heat but at the moment that does mean keeping people warm in the winter, allowing them to put their gas fire on.
Isn't that a fair point in the sense of your target, just to remind everyone, 2025 you want to hit this by, but actually isn't there an argument that if you do this too quickly, too fast, that the poorest will be hit? They will struggle to heat their homes, food prices will go up, so they'll struggle to feed their families, and then you risk alienating people on this journey.
Sure. And, you know, climate justice and dealing with vulnerable communities is very much at the heart of the principles that Extinction Rebellion and nearly every group is actually espousing. No one is saying punish the poor and punish those who are fuel poor in any way. So that's a sort of false argument. But I'd really like to stress, actually,
could be doing that.
Energy efficiency is one of the most cost-effective ways of improving fuel poverty and generating wealth in the household. And again, that's been cut in the programmes for making our very old poor housing stock more energy efficient has not been supported. What has been supported is a massive increase in roads, a massive increase in spending to the H2S link, which is not going to benefit everyone equally in any way. And what's been supported is fracking and the shale industry. So, and aviation, as I said, all high-end policies that support essentially the richer people in society.
But there has been progress. I mean, there are targets. There is movement towards that. I mean, Friends of the Earth say it would be extremely ambitious to reach the target that you would like to be carbon neutral by 2045, nowhere near 2025. So where have you got that number from?
Well, the government is currently, the government's own climate change committee, which is the advisory body that, you know, advises the government on its long-term targets and on its carbon budgets. That's already said that, you know, the UK is not on track to meet its fourth or its fifth carbon budget. So there aren't enough policies.
As in,
that's a fact.
Do you agree, though, that in terms of it's not on track? Fine, I accept that's a fact, but that it's not actually being focused on as well at the moment. Because you made the joke, we're not talking about Brexit, but Brexit has taken the energy out of so much, including
Don't get me wrong, I'm not making any sort of argument for complacency. There's a lot more we can do. We could do more on innovation. We certainly could have more, we would benefit from a greater political focus. But what I don't want to do is take away from the fantastic innovation, the investment and the energy that there is in the low carbon economy. If you look at Britain's now the centre for electric vehicles, that's come because of government support. We've got a fantastic energy secretary, Claire Perry, who really gets this agenda and is certainly doing a lot to push it further. But the budget that you're talking about, that's the 2050 aim to reduce by 80%. And what I am keen to see is that 80% target in 2050 get cut to 100%, so we're net zero, and we can carry on playing a leadership role.
Net zero was set as a goal in Paris, and it's taken Claire Perry 3 years just to trigger the review, to ask the Climate Change Committee. So that's the kind of complacency and tardiness, frankly, that is being challenged today on the streets.
Thank you very much to both of you for joining us.